Whether you're wanting to try your hand at DMing for the first time, or you are a seasoned pro, the process of learning how to run a great game is ongoing. There are always tips to learn, new insights to be found, and fresh ideas to inspire. This video is intended to give advice and criticism on how to make your gaming sessions the best they can be, and hopefully provide you with some creativity. While I'm currently running Dungeons & Dragons 4th edition, much of the content of this video could be useful for any edition, or even other game systems entirely. Crafting a dungeon adventure. Dungeons. Quite obviously, they're one of the most core elements of the Dungeons & Dragons role-playing game. I'm going to feature here a method for creating a solid dungeon ready for adventure. Please bear in mind that this is not the only way in which you could build a dungeon. It is merely one that I have found works really well. Building a dungeon can be a really interesting and inspiring project, and there are all kinds of facets to it that you could explore. So let's jump right in. Step 1. Dungeon level. First of all, you need to determine what level the dungeon is. Typically, your player characters will adventure in a dungeon of their level. Let's say in this case, you have a party of 4 second-level characters. It's important to note how many characters you expect to explore the dungeon, as this directly affects your encounter building later on. One of the great aspects of 4th edition is the ability to adjust for more or less characters very quickly, but we'll get into that later. So, a level 2 dungeon it is. Step 2. Dungeon location and theme. The next step is to start developing what kind of dungeon this is. What is the location or physical construction of the dungeon? Is it a castle? A crypt? A cavern network? A mine? What kind of theme or themes does the dungeon have? Is it haunted by undead? Flooded with water? Overgrown with strange fungi? Warped by some magical effect? These sorts of themes go on and on. Since this is a level 2 dungeon, you'll want to stick with things that low-level characters would be involved with. In other words, it probably shouldn't be the lair of an ancient dragon or a demon lord. But at level 2, defeating the chieftain of a nasty goblin tribe can still give you that same great sense of satisfaction. I'm going to pick a couple options here for my sample dungeon. I'm going with a ruin location, and I'm giving it a fire theme. Step 3. What's going on at the dungeon? Now, dungeons are good when they have something going on at them. It can be fun just to have a random dungeon with beasties and treasure every once in a while, but most often, there should be some kind of plot. It can tie into the campaign's main storyline, or it could be a side plot, or you can use the dungeon to launch a whole new arc of the campaign. In other words, the dungeon matters when the dungeon matters. In the case of my sample dungeon here, let's say that this fire theme is coming from a supernatural source. I'm going with an extra planner touch here and say that in the depths of this dungeon, there is a fire that leaked into the world from the elemental chaos. Also, there is a villain who is trying to harness this fiery power for her own. This quickly spawns an idea in my mind of an interesting villain. I'm going to call her Morvina Kunova. She is an arcanist whose parents were cultists to an evil entity. When she was young, the town guard, or maybe even hired adventurers, slew her parents. And during the raid, they caught her house on fire. She was burned badly in the blaze, which was made doubly tragic because she was going to be a beautiful woman. Instead, her obviously potential good looks are forever marred by horrible scars. Now, when she learns of this supernatural fire, she seeks to invoke its power and wreak revenge upon her hometown or those who she feels responsible for her parents' demise and her own grisly deformities. Okay, so we now see the basic concept of this dungeon taking shape. Let's move on to the next big step. Step 4. Encounter building. A dungeon almost always has a series of multiple encounters. My sample dungeon here is going to be a small dungeon, so I'm going to say it'll have about 3 or 4 encounters, and then I'll start planning. My idea here is I want to run 1 standard combat encounter, one hard combat encounter, one optional standard combat encounter, meaning the characters can avoid or use their skills to circumvent the combat in some way, and one skill challenge. The first encounter I'm going to build here is actually the skill challenge. It seems like a skill challenge would be a good way to start off the adventure associated with this dungeon. Let's say the ruin this dungeon is in is actually an expansive ruin. There is a site with many decrepit stone structures. This site is located a day or two away from the town. I'm using page 72 of the Dungeon Master's Guide, along with its updates from the Wizards of the Coast website. The process of building the skill challenge will go something like this. I name it Locating the Ruin. It's a skill challenge at level 2. The XP is 375, so the skill challenge is significant, but it isn't massive. I'm going to describe it quickly here. In this skill challenge, the characters must trek from town through wilderness to the adventure site, and then locate the correct building among the various ruin buildings. The complexity I'm setting at 3, since again this is going to be significant but not so massive. Complexity 3 requires 8 successes before 3 failures. The time frame it's going to span is roughly 2 days. It's going to go into 2 parts here. The first part takes 4 successes to get through. The primary skills are Endurance, History, and Nature. Endurance is a group check at DC 12. Everyone in the party makes an endurance check to keep up their stamina during the trek. Half the characters have to succeed to gain a success in the skill challenge. Everyone that fails the endurance check on a personal level loses a healing surge. This group skill check can only be used to gain 1 success in the whole skill challenge. History, DC 15. The character remembers a historical tale of the location of the adventure site, likely pertaining to the time before it was a ruin. And last is Nature, DC 13. The character guides the party through the wilderness. This helps the party to stay on track and avoid natural hazards. Also, I'm going to put in a secondary skill of Perception. With a DC 13, the character keeps watch out for anything that can aid the guides. Natural landmarks, distant objects, or even monster tracks to avoid. Success grants the next primary skill a +2 bonus, while failure imposes a -2 penalty. Part 2 of the Locating the Ruin skill challenge has the following primary skills, because this is after the characters actually got to the site now. Arcana, Dungeoneering, and Perception. First up is Arcana DC 17. Though it's kind of difficult, the character senses a slight hint of elemental power, which leads the party in a general direction. Dungeoneering is DC 13. The character inspects and appraises the various stone buildings, looking for one that still has structural integrity. Perception DC 13. The character looks for signs that somebody came through here recently and uses such clues to point the party in the right direction. The secondary skill in this part is Athletics. It's a DC 13. The character uses Athletics to clear out a section of heavy rubble, aiding the lead navigators. Success grants the next primary skill a +2 bonus, while failure imposes a -2 penalty. If the characters achieve victory in the skill challenge, the party locates the correct structure at the ruin site. They may now enter the dungeon. If they suffer defeat, while exploring, the party inadvertently triggers a collapse of stone. Each character is subject to an attack. That attack is +5 versus reflex. On a hit, they take 2d6 +4 damage, and the character must succeed on an acrobatics or an athletics check, DC 15. If they don't succeed on this check, they sustain a minor wound from being trapped under heavy rock, and he or she is slowed until the end of the next combat encounter. The party may then retry the skill challenge, starting at Part 2, now with a complexity 1, which is 4 successes before 3 failures. Now I'm going to design the standard combat encounter. I'm using pages 56 through 57 of the Dungeon Master's Guide, and using these pages I determine an experience point budget for a level 2 encounter for 4 characters. I'm using the monster manual for monsters. This is going to be a level 2 encounter. It's worth 500 XP. It's going to feature 1 ochre jelly and 2 fire beetles. The next encounter I'm going to design is the hard combat encounter. This is going to be the encounter with Morvina Canova and her lackeys, so it'll be a big one. The characters will have to use their best powers to win through this one. I'm going with an experience point budget of a level 5 combat encounter. It's going to be worth 800 XP, featuring 1 human mage, that's Morvina, 1 human berserker, 1 hobgoblin warcaster, and 2 spitting drakes. Last is going to be an optional encounter. I'm going to make this one a scene in which the characters come upon a group of fire beetles threatening a pack of rats. The characters can use skills or ingenuity to avoid this encounter and gain 31 XP apiece. Some examples would be sneaking around the monsters, that's a group stealth check of DC 13, or secretly instigating a fight between the two groups. This as well would be a group check, and each character could use bluff or nature with a DC 13. Or the characters can just fight the monsters. I'm going to make this a level 3 combat encounter, that's worth 600 XP, including 3 fire beetles, 2 dire rats, 4 giant rats. Step 5, drawing the dungeon map. As an artist, I really love this step of the process. If you're not proficient at drawing, use the lines on the graph paper or a grid to help you. Just hold your hands steady and just give it your best. Don't worry too much. Your players will be happy just getting the basic idea of the layout of the encounter rooms, and they will fill in the rest with their imaginations. I'm going to show a quick overview of the drawing process, and I'm going to intentionally keep my drawing very simple here. I'll give you some of my thoughts as I go along. Okay, so here we have our grid, our graph paper. I've made just a very basic texture for the background, not necessary, just for an aesthetic value. Okay, first I'm going to draw the dungeon entrance here. We've got a double door. Always nice to have some stairs going down into a corridor. First I'm going to draw the main entry room. I've intentionally made some of the walls decrepit, so there's that sense that stone has eroded away in places. And in the upper right, there is an area where something might have burrowed in or dug in through the stone. And we've got some stairs going down on both sides. These are going to lead to this larger corridor which is wrapping around. And in the middle of this, of course, is this middle chamber, which as well shows these signs of something burrowing through it. Then there's going to be this upper chamber. The character's going to come in on a little platform that descends on both sides. The back of the room, I think it'd be neat to have this area where the floor has crumbled beneath. There's a section that just drops down, and a little bit of the floor is left intact, forming a bridge. And then beyond that, there is a dais. And last, I think it'd be cool to put in a little secret corridor there. Always nice to have some secret doors. The last thing I do here is just fill in a little bit of light coloration. This is just to help you know where the solid stone is at, and just to make that pit really look more like a pit. Always helpful for when you're drawing this thing on the fly. Step 6, treasure. Using the Dungeon Master Guide, I next determine how much treasure I want to be in this dungeon. It seems logical, based upon what is occurring, that Morvina and her group should have most of the treasure here. They've probably already searched around this dungeon. Plus, it'll give me a chance to equip her with a cool magic item. Step 7, fleshing out the dungeon. In this final step, I basically go over everything I've noted down and drawn out. I look for areas of opportunity to develop the dungeon and fill in details. Again, I'm not getting too elaborate in this dungeon, so I'll touch base on just a few main points. First, I selected a fire theme, so let's put in some fire. Right when the characters first come in, they should notice these fiery motes hanging in the air. Not only do they provide illumination, but they can burn. Since this is a level 2 dungeon, let's say that any creature who enters a square containing the fire motes or ends their turn there takes 5 fire damage. You can only take that a maximum of once per round. As a standard action, a character trained in Arcana can make an Arcana check at DC 15 to extinguish all the motes in a room or a corridor for 5 minutes. Rolling a 10 or lower causes the character to get burned, and they take 1d6 plus 5 fire damage. As well, as a move action, A character can move through a space with fire motes at half speed without any harm by succeeding on a DC 15 acrobatics check. I've decided to fill both the left and the right corridors at the beginning here with the fire motes to really spice up the fiery nature of this place and to make things feel more dangerous. Now let's put the elemental flame in the very final room. Since this fire is very hot and strong, I'll say it deals 2d4 plus 5 fire damage. The skill check to extinguish it cannot work during combat, and no one can slip past it with acrobatics. Since this is the power site, let's say that outside of combat, a character who's trained in Arcana can attempt to manipulate the flame. This Arcana check requires 10 minutes of study and interaction and is DC 20. A character that succeeds can choose to either harness the flame's power or extinguish it. A character that harnesses the power gains the following daily attack power. They can make it a close blast 5 or an area burst 2 within 10 squares. It targets each creature in either of those areas. The attack is plus 7 versus reflex, and on a hit, it deals 2d6 plus 5 fire damage. On a miss, it still deals half damage. As a special property, you can increase the power's damage to 4d6 plus 5 fire damage, but doing so causes you to lose the power until you again harness the elemental flame. This power is the equivalent of a level 4 magic item when it comes time to figuring out treasure allotment. A character that extinguishes the elemental flame causes it to burn out forever, though it leaves behind a small pile of crystallized fire salts, which are 170 GP worth of alchemical reagents. And just to add that sense that you're messing with something from the elemental chaos, if a character fails this Arcana check to harness or extinguish the flame, they cannot retry it until he or she gains a level. If the character rolls a DC 15 or lower, he or she also takes 3d6 plus 5 fire damage. Burn. Now, to populate the rooms. This first room I made to run the standard encounter in. So I'll have the beetles milling about and the ooze in the ruined wall burrow there. The very middle room seems a good place to put in the optional encounter. I'll split the two monster groups up a bit. The final room is for the hard encounter, Morvina and her lackeys. The floor is caved in at an area, causing a 10-foot deep pit. There is a narrow stone bridge which requires a DC 10 acrobatics check to balance across. Morvina is likely right by the elemental flame, with the hobgoblin warcaster nearby. The berserker is by the bridge, and the two drakes guard the entryway. Morvina is aware of the secret passageway, and she may use it to flee if things get too ugly. She may even get away and go on to become a recurring villain in the campaign. Otherwise, finding the hidden passage requires a DC 15 perception check. So, we have this dungeon pretty well fleshed out. You could do more with it, but it's really your preference how complex you want things to get. For example, that empty room in the entry chamber might be locked and contain Morvina's storage or even a sleeping area. Or maybe it is sealed tightly and she never even got into it. Maybe there is a stairway which leads down deeper into a new level of the dungeon. Also, you could spend time crafting more of Morvina's backstory, or writing more about her current agenda. Or you could write a background about the dungeon site and how the elemental flame appeared. Did a cult used to dwell here, performing rites to a primordial of fire? Did a powerful fire mage perform arcane experiments here? The possibilities are vast, but for now, I'll leave things as is. This dungeon is set to provide a solid night of gaming. Types of adventures. The final thought I'd like to leave you with is that adventures come in many forms. They are as varied as there are types of films and books. If we were to look at the various formats such as action, drama, horror, or suspense and mystery, we quickly become informed of the elements that drive storytelling. In this video, we looked at a single type of adventure, the dungeon-based adventure, sometimes known as the dungeon crawl. I must stress that this is but one type of adventure out of many that someone could run. I am focusing on the dungeon adventure first, because I feel it is one of the most fundamental types of adventures to build. It is arguably the most core building block for the game. Even though I love to explore deeper styles of play, I cannot deny that the dungeon adventure has a sense of familiarity to it that I adore, and I know I'm not alone there. So, we journey together, bold adventurers, and until we meet again, keep tending the flame that burns deep within.